A young billionaire walks into a diner with his little daughter. She points at the waitress and says, "Daddy, that's Mommy." He replies, smiling, "No, sweetheart, Mommy became a star." But when he turned to look, he froze. The woman was identical to the wife he had lost. The sky was grey that autumn afternoon. Liam watched through the window as the leaves fell, exactly like they did that day almost a year ago. A year without Amelia. A year in which the house felt bigger and the silence felt heavier. Only the soft footsteps of Riley in the hallway brought any life to the place. "Daddy, can we go out? Please?" Riley appeared in the living room, hugging her worn teddy bear, a gift from Amelia on her last birthday. Liam turned to his daughter, trying to hide his sadness. For weeks, she had been asking to go out, but he always made up an excuse. The truth was that every corner of the city held memories of Amelia. "It's ugly weather out there, sweetheart." "But you promised," insisted Riley, her eyes full of hope. He had promised the night before, when she couldn't sleep because of nightmares. He promised they would go to the park, have ice cream, do normal things. Things normal families did. Complete families. "You're right," Liam agreed, forcing a smile. "Let's get ready." 20 minutes later, they were walking down Main Street. Riley held his hand tightly, looking around with renewed curiosity. It was like rediscovering the world, Liam thought. Maybe it was time for him to do the same. "Daddy, I'm hungry," said Riley, tugging his hand and pointing to a diner on the corner. Liam hesitated. It wasn't the diner they used to go to with Amelia. It was new. Maybe it had opened in the months he shut himself away from the world. No memories, no ghosts. "All right, let's go." The diner was cozy, with red upholstered booths and granite tabletops. A few families occupied the tables, and the smell of coffee and toast filled the air. They found an empty table near the window. "What do you want to eat, Princess?" "Pancakes with chocolate syrup," Riley answered excitedly, flipping through the illustrated kids' menu. Liam smiled, genuinely this time. It was good to see his daughter happy. Since Amelia's death, her smiles had become rare, precious. He blamed himself for that, for not knowing how to fill the void her mother left behind. "Pancakes for the little missy then, and a very strong coffee for me." When the waitress approached to take their order, Liam kept his eyes on the menu, still deciding between a sandwich or just coffee. "Good morning, have you decided what you'd like?" asked a gentle voice. That voice made the hairs on the back of Liam's neck stand up. There was something familiar about it, something that hit a sensitive spot in his memory. Before he could look up, Riley let out a sharp cry. She points at the waitress and says, "Daddy, that's Mommy." Liam's heart skipped a beat. He looked at Riley, who was standing on the booth seat, pointing at the waitress with wide eyes. A mix of confusion and fear took hold of him. He replies, smiling, "No, sweetheart. Mommy became a star." But when he turned to look, he froze. The woman was identical to the wife he had lost. There she was, standing with a notepad in her hand and a confused expression, a woman identical to Amelia. The same wavy brown hair falling over her shoulders, the same honey-colored eyes, even the tiny scar above her right eyebrow. His mind couldn't process what his eyes were seeing. It was like being trapped in a dream he couldn't wake up from. "Sir, are you all right?" asked the woman, concerned about his reaction. The voice, the way she slightly tilted her head, everything was Amelia, but it couldn't be. Amelia was dead. He saw her in the hospital, attended the funeral, visited her grave every month. "Sorry," Liam finally managed to mumble. You look so much like someone we knew." The waitress gave an embarrassed smile, clearly uncomfortable with the situation. "I get that sometimes," she replied, adjusting the name tag on her uniform. "I must have one of those common faces." Liam managed to read the name on the tag, Sophie. Riley was still staring at the waitress, her eyes full of confusion and hope. "But you look like Mommy," Riley insisted. "Exactly like her." Sophie looked at the child with a gentle smile, but Liam could see she was uncomfortable. "Sweetheart, shall we order our food?" Liam tried to divert his daughter's attention. "Remember the pancakes you wanted? We have pancakes with strawberry syrup too." Sophie offered, clearly trying to ease the tension. "Mommy always asked for strawberry," said Riley, her voice small, almost a whisper. A heavy silence fell over the table. Sophie bit her lip, a sympathetic expression on her face. "I'm sorry for your loss," she said softly. "I'll bring you some special pancakes, okay?" Riley nodded, still looking at Sophie as though she were some sort of apparition. "And for you, sir?" Sophie asked, turning to Liam, who was still struggling to regain his composure. "Just coffee, please. Black?" Sophie jotted down the order and walked away, casting one last compassionate look at the small family. As soon as she was gone, Riley turned to her father, her eyes glowing with excitement. "Daddy, it's Mommy." She came back. Liam felt his heart ache. How could he explain to a child that people don't come back from death, that no matter how much you wish, how much you pray, some farewells are forever? "Riley, listen," he began, holding his daughter's little hands in his own. "That lady looks a lot like Mommy, it's true, but she isn't her. Mommy isn't coming back. Remember? We talked about that." Riley's eyes filled with tears. "But she looks just like her, she has the same smile." "Sometimes people look very much alike," Liam explained, though he himself was shaken by the stunning resemblance. "It's just a coincidence." But was it really just coincidence? The similarity was uncanny. It wasn't just physical, but her mannerisms, her way of speaking. Liam felt his mind spinning, searching for rational explanations. When Sophie returned with their order, Liam watched her every move, the way she placed the plate of pancakes in front of Riley, carefully so as not to spill the syrup, exactly as Amelia used to do. The way she tucked a strand of hair behind her ear while she served the coffee. "Your special pancakes with extra syrup, as promised," Sophie said, winking at Riley. The little girl smiled, momentarily distracted by the treat before her. Liam nodded his thanks, unable to form words. While Riley ate, Liam couldn't stop watching Sophie as she tended to other tables. Who was she? How could she look so much like Amelia? Could it be possible that... No, that was madness. People die and don't return. "Daddy, these pancakes are yummy. Do you want to try?" Riley's voice brought Liam back to reality. He smiled at his daughter, accepting the piece of pancake she offered. "It's delicious, princess." When they finished eating, Sophie brought the check. She had drawn a smiling star in the corner of the receipt, probably referencing the explanation Liam had given Riley about where her mother was now. "I hope you enjoyed it," Sophie said. "Come back anytime." Liam paid the bill, leaving a generous tip. He didn't know what to think or feel. Part of him wanted to run away and never come back. Another part wanted to know more about this woman who was the living ghost of his lost love. "Thank you," he said at last. "The place is nice." Sophie smiled, and for a moment, Liam had the strange sensation that she was studying him too, as though something about him stirred a distant memory. "Shall we, Daddy?" Riley called, already standing and ready to leave. Liam nodded, taking his daughter's hand. As they left the diner, he couldn't help looking back one last time. Sophie stood there, watching them, an indecipherable expression on her familiar face. That night, after putting Riley to bed, Liam stayed up for hours, looking at old photos of Amelia. The resemblance was impossible, identical, as if they were the same person. Maybe it was just his mind playing tricks on him, his heart desperate for a miracle he knew was impossible. Or maybe, just maybe, there was more to this story than his eyes could see. One thing he knew: he would go back to that diner. He needed to understand. He needed to know who Sophie was and why she was the exact image of the woman he loved and lost. 3 days had passed since the encounter at the diner, 3 days in which Liam couldn't get Sophie out of his mind. The resemblance to Amelia disturbed him, haunting him during sleepless nights. He needed to return to that place. He needed answers. Riley wouldn't stop talking about the lady who looks like Mommy. In a child's innocent mind, it had to mean something. On a rainy Thursday, Liam left Riley at her paternal grandmother's house and drove to the diner. His heart pounded as he parked. Part of him feared Sophie wouldn't be there, that it had all been a dream, a hallucination of his broken heart. The door chime sounded as he entered. The place was nearly empty at that hour. Sophie was behind the counter, arranging cups. When she looked up and saw him, her expression changed. It wasn't surprise, it was something deeper, as if she too had been waiting for this moment. "Hello," Liam said, approaching the counter. "I'm not sure if you remember me." "Of course I remember," Sophie smiled. "You're the father of the little girl who loves pancakes with syrup. Where is she today?" "With her grandma. Liam hesitated. How to explain what brought him here? "I wanted to talk to you, if that's not a problem." Sophie glanced at the clock on the wall. "Actually, my shift ends in 10 minutes. If you can wait, we can have some coffee." Liam nodded and sat at a table in the corner. He watched Sophie finish her tasks, the same way of walking, the same way of pushing hair behind her ear. It was unnerving. 10 minutes later, Sophie joined him, no longer in uniform, wearing jeans and a simple blouse. She brought 2 cups of coffee. "So," she began, "is your daughter feeling better?" She seemed very upset that day. "Riley isn't coping. It's been almost a year since we lost my wife. It's still hard for her." Sophie lowered her eyes. "I'm sorry. That must be very tough for both of you." Liam gathered his courage. "Sophie, this will sound strange, but do you have any sisters? Or maybe relatives in the region?" Sophie frowned, surprised by the question. "Not that I know of. I grew up in an orphanage a few hours from here. I never met my biological family." She paused. "Why?" Liam felt his heart race. He reached into his pocket and took out a photograph. "Because of this." He slid the photo across the table. It showed Amelia on her last birthday, smiling for the camera, holding a tiny Riley in her arms. Sophie's eyes widened. The cup she was holding almost fell from her hands. She picked up the photo with trembling fingers. "My God," she whispered. "We're identical. My wife, Amelia," Liam explained, his voice shaky. "She passed away 11 months ago. A car accident." Sophie kept staring at the photo, touching her own face as if to confirm the similarity. Tears filled her eyes. "I've never seen anyone who looked so much like me," she said, her voice faltering. "It's like looking in a mirror." "When I saw you that day, I thought I was hallucinating," Liam confessed. "Riley thought it was her mum who had come back." Sophie lifted her gaze from the photo, meeting Liam's eyes. "Who am I?" The question came out as a painful whisper. "All my life, I was told I was abandoned, that my parents didn't want me. I never looked deeper because I thought it would hurt too much, but this," she pointed to the photo, "this changes everything." A heavy silence fell between them. Both felt the weight of the moment, of discoveries that could change their lives forever. "Amelia rarely spoke about her family," Liam finally said. "Her parents died before we met. She only had a distant aunt, who she wasn't close to." "Do you think we were sisters?" Sophie asked, looking at the photo again. "The resemblance is undeniable. You could be twins." "Twins," Sophie repeated the word as if tasting it. "I was born on March 12th. When was her birthday?" Liam felt a chill run down his spine. March 12th. Sophie's eyes filled with tears once more. She covered her mouth with her hand, unable to contain her emotion. How is this possible? How did we never know about each other? Liam remembered something, an old conversation with Amelia. Amelia once mentioned that her parents went through severe financial hardship when she was a baby. They almost lost everything. She never went into detail and changed the subject whenever I asked. Sophie wiped her tears with the back of her hand. "Do you think that they might have given me away? Kept just one baby because they couldn't afford two?" "It's possible," Liam answered softly. "Many families faced impossible choices in hard times." Sophie looked out the window at the rain outside. Her mind seemed far away, processing a lifetime of unanswered questions. "All my life, I wondered who I was," she said after a moment. "Why I was abandoned, if I had family somewhere. And now I find out I had a twin sister, a sister I never met, who's already gone." Liam felt helpless in the face of her pain. What could he say to comfort someone who had just gained a sister and lost her at the same moment? "Amelia was amazing," he said finally. "Kind, strong, full of life. She loved music and dancing in the rain. She made Riley laugh like no one else could." Sophie smiled through her tears. She sounds like a wonderful person. I wish I had the chance to know her." "She would have loved to meet you too," Liam said sincerely. For a few minutes, they sat in silence, each absorbed in their own thoughts. The rain pattered against the diner windows, creating a melancholy melody. "What do we do now?" Sophie finally asked. It was a question Liam had no answer to. What do you do when the past and present collide so unexpectedly? "I don't know," he admitted, "but I think Amelia would want us to get to know each other, for you to meet Riley. Won't she be confused? Seeing someone who looks so much like her mum? Probably. But children adapt more easily than we think, and she's already seen you. She already feels there's a connection." Sophie handed the photo back to Liam. "Can I think about it? It's a lot to process." "Of course," Liam agreed, taking the photograph back. "Take all the time you need." He wrote his number on a napkin and handed it to her. "Call me when you're ready to talk." Sophie took the napkin and tucked it into her purse. When her eyes met Liam's again, there was something different in them, a blend of hope, fear, and perhaps the start of new possibilities. "Thank you for coming here," she said, "for showing me that photo. For giving me a part of my story I never knew existed." Liam nodded. "Thank you for listening. I know it's not easy." They said goodbye at the diner door. The rain had eased, but the sky was still overcast. "See you soon, Sophie." "See you soon, Liam." He walked to his car, feeling different from the man who arrived there hours earlier. Something had changed. A door he thought was closed forever was now opening to an unknown future. As he drove back to pick up Riley, Liam wondered how he would explain all this to his daughter, how he would tell her that the waitress who looked so much like her mum was, in fact, the aunt she never knew she had. Life was truly full of surprises, sometimes painful, sometimes wonderful. This one, he still couldn't say which category it fell into, but he felt, in some inexplicable way, that Amelia had left them this gift to find, a part of her still in the world, a chance at healing none of them expected. A week had passed since the conversation at the diner. Sophie stirred a spoon in her now cold coffee as she gazed out the window of her tiny apartment. The grey sky matched her mood, cloudy and heavy with doubts. Ever since she'd seen that photo of Amelia, a strange feeling had settled in her chest, a mix of revelation and emptiness, like discovering an essential piece of her life's puzzle, only to find the entire picture would never be complete. Her phone lay on the table, Liam's number scribbled on the napkin beside it, now crumpled from the many times she had picked it up, hesitated, and then put it back down. What would she say? How could she put her internal whirlwind into words? "Come on, Sophie. It's just a phone call," she murmured to herself, trying to build up courage. Finally, she took a deep breath and dialed. Her fingers trembled slightly as she listened to the ringing. Liam answered on the third ring. "Hello? Liam? It's Sophie." A brief silence on the other end, as if he too was searching for the right words. "Sophie, I'm glad you called." She closed her eyes, gripping the phone tightly. "We need to talk. I need to know more. About her, about me, about us." "Of course," Liam replied gently, "whenever you want." They agreed to meet at the city's Central Park that afternoon, a neutral place, outdoors, where they could talk without the curious stares of the diner patrons. The park was quiet that Tuesday. A few mothers pushed strollers, an elderly man tossed breadcrumbs to ducks, and two teenagers skated along a winding path by the lake. A normal, everyday scene that contrasted with Sophie's emotional whirlwind. She arrived first, choosing a secluded bench with a view of the water. She sat, adjusting her light jacket against the cool afternoon breeze. What would life be like if she had never worked at that diner? If Liam and Riley had never walked in, she would go on living without knowing who she really was. She spotted Liam walking along the stone path. He was alone, hands in his coat pockets, his face marked by the same kind of confusion she felt. "Hi," he said, sitting next to her, keeping a polite distance. "Hi," Sophie replied. "Thanks for coming." For a few moments, they sat in silence, watching the park's tranquil scenery. A duck dove into the lake, sending ripples across the water's calm surface. "I haven't slept well since we talked," Sophie finally confessed, breaking the silence. I have so many questions, so many things that don't make sense. Me too, Liam admitted, staring at his hands. It's like my world's been turned upside down. I want to know more about her, about Amelia, Sophie said, turning to face him. What she was like, what she liked to do. And I want to know more about her family. Our family, I guess. Liam nodded, taking his phone out of his pocket. I brought some photos, if you want to see them. Sophie agreed with a nod, and Liam handed her the phone. There were dozens of pictures. Amelia at the beach, her wavy hair blowing in the sea breeze. Amelia holding a baby Riley, her eyes gleaming with pride. Amelia smiling at a picnic, her face so similar to Sophie's that it looked like a photo edit. It was so strange, Liam commented, as Sophie scrolled through the images. Amelia barely talked about her family. She always changed the subject when I asked about her parents or her childhood. Now I understand why. Do you think she knew? About me, I mean. Liam frowned, thinking, his gaze fixed on a distant point. I'm not sure. She never mentioned a twin sister, but there were moments, times when she seemed distant, lost in thought, especially on her birthday. I always thought it was related to some childhood memory, but now I wonder if she was thinking of you. Sophie wiped away a tear that escaped down her cheek. It felt strange to cry for someone she never met, but in some way, Amelia's loss now felt personal, as though she had lost a part of herself she never knew existed. Where did her parents live? I mean, our parents. They lived in Willowdale, a small town a few hours away, but I didn't have much contact with her family, Liam said, looking toward the lake. Amelia kept her distance from them, especially her mother. Is her mother, our mother, still alive? Liam paused, running a hand through his hair in discomfort. As far as I know, yes. I only met her once, at our wedding. She didn't stay long for the reception. She was quiet, reserved. She seemed out of place, like she was there out of obligation. What's her name? Eleanor. Eleanor Mills. Sophie repeated the name under her breath, testing how it sounded on her lips. The name of her biological mother. A woman who carried her for 9 months and then, for unknown reasons, decided to leave her behind. Do you have an address? A phone number? The last address I have is from when I sent a letter after Amelia's funeral. I never got a response, so I don't know if she still lives there. Liam hesitated, studying Sophie's face. Are you thinking about looking for her? I have to, Sophie replied, her tone firm but voice trembling. I have to understand why I was abandoned, why she kept Amelia but not me, why she never tried to find me. Sophie, Liam gently touched her arm. We don't know how she'll react. If she never mentioned you to Amelia, there must be a reason. I don't want you to get hurt any more than you already have. I've spent my whole life hurting with unanswered questions, Liam, she answered, her eyes meeting his. Growing up in an orphanage, watching other kids get adopted while you stay behind, wondering what's wrong with you. That's real pain. Knowing the truth, no matter how bad it is, can't be worse than living in ignorance. Liam observed her for a moment, seeing the determination in her eyes, the same eyes Amelia had when she made a decision no one could dissuade her from. The same intensity, the same spark. I can help you find her, he finally offered. I have the old address and her full name. It's a start. I can make some calls to check if she still lives there. You'd do that? Sophie asked, gratitude obvious in her voice. Of course, Liam replied simply. Why? You don't owe me anything. You barely know me. Liam looked at the lake, thoughtful. Maybe because of Riley. She deserves to know the family she has, the whole story. Or maybe because of Amelia, to finally understand the secrets she kept. Or maybe, he paused, maybe because you deserve answers, Sophie. Everyone deserves to know where they came from. Sophie gave a timid smile, thankful for his unexpected support. Thank you, Liam, that means a lot. Just promise me one thing, he said, his tone more serious. If you decide to go to Willowdale, don't go alone. Let me go with you, or at least know you have someone to lean on afterwards. Why do you care so much? Because... Liam hesitated, choosing his words carefully. Because you're a connection to Amelia I never thought I'd find. And because no one should face this kind of thing alone, a comfortable silence settled between them. Sophie watched a family of ducks gliding across the water, a mother in front, followed by 5 ducklings in single file, an intact, complete family, something she never had. "What was Amelia like with Riley?" she asked, changing the subject. Liam smiled, his eyes lighting up at the memory. "She was incredible, patient, loving, creative. She made every moment feel special, even the most ordinary things. When Riley was sick, Amelia would stay up all night by her side, telling her stories, holding her hand. She said being a mom was the most important thing she'd ever done." Sophie felt a pang of sadness. The sister she never met had been a wonderful mother, while their own mother had abandoned her. Life was full of cruel ironies. "I imagine Riley misses her a lot." "Every day," Liam confirmed. "She still asks when Mommy is coming back, even after so many explanations about death. It's hard for a child to understand something so final." And then she saw me at the diner, and for a moment, she believed the impossible. They exchanged a meaningful look. Sophie's resemblance to Amelia had sparked a brief hope in a little girl's broken heart. No matter how complicated the situation was, there was something beautiful in that. "I want to get to know her better," Sophie said softly. "Riley, I mean, if you'll allow it." "Of course," Liam replied without hesitation. "She's already asked about you a few times. The lady who looks like Mommy. I think it would be good for her. And for you too, maybe." Sophie nodded, a shy smile forming on her lips. "Thank you." As the sun began to set, casting long shadows across the park, they continued talking. Liam shared more about Amelia, her taste in music, her fear of heights, her passion for classic sci-fi movies. With each detail, Sophie felt a stronger connection to the sister she never knew. She also bit her lip when she was nervous. "Like this." Sophie demonstrated the unconscious habit she had always had. Liam's eyes widened. "Exactly like that. It's amazing how you two share these little gestures, even though you grew up apart. Nature versus nurture, I guess. Some things are in our blood." As the park grew emptier with nightfall, Liam pulled a folded piece of paper from his pocket. "I wrote down some information that might help with your search. Your mother's old address in Willowdale, her full name, and the birth date I saw on some documents." Sophie took the paper carefully, as though it were a fragile relic. "I don't know how to thank you." "You don't have to, just be careful, okay? These kinds of reunions don't always go as we hope." "I'm prepared for the worst," Sophie said, though they both knew no one is ever truly prepared for the kind of rejection she feared. Before saying goodbye, they exchanged phone numbers and agreed to keep in touch about any progress in the search. As Liam walked away along the park path, Sophie remained on the bench, clutching the paper with her mother's information in her hands. That night, Sophie couldn't sleep. In her small apartment, she spread every piece of information she had on her kitchen table: the address in Willowdale, Eleanor Mills's full name, her birth date. With her laptop, she began searching for any clue, any confirmation that the woman still lived there. After hours of searching, she found a reference to an E. Mills in a local Willowdale newspaper from just 4 months ago, a small note about a charity event at the town church. It might be her, there was no way to be sure, but it was a lead. Around midnight, her phone buzzed with a message from Liam. "Found an old phone directory. The number I have is probably outdated, but the address could still be useful. The house is near the main church in town. Hope it helps." Sophie replied immediately. "Thank you. I found a mention of an E. Mills in a recent local paper. I think she still lives there. I'm thinking of going to Willowdale next weekend." Liam's response arrived seconds later. "Are you sure? That's a big step." Sophie glanced at the photo of Amelia she had printed and set on the table. That face so similar to hers, yet tied to a completely different life. "I have to do this. I have to look her in the eyes and ask why." There was a pause before Liam's next message. "I understand. If you need company, I can go with you. You don't have to face this alone." Sophie felt a wave of gratitude. It was strange how life worked sometimes. 2 weeks ago, she didn't know Liam or Amelia. Now Liam was her link to a past she never knew she had. "Thank you for the offer. I'll think about it." In truth, Sophie had already decided. She would go to Willowdale, find Eleanor Mills, and demand answers. But part of her was terrified of the meeting, terrified of what she might discover, terrified of yet another rejection. Having Liam by her side would make it a little less scary. Over the next few days, preparations for the trip took shape. Sophie asked for time off at the diner. Liam arranged for Riley to spend the weekend with his mother. Together, they planned the trip to Willowdale, a small town that held the secrets both of them were searching for. On the eve of departure, Sophie was in her apartment packing a small bag when her phone rang. It was Liam. "All set for tomorrow?" he asked. "Yes," Sophie answered, glancing at the half-packed suitcase on her bed. "I'm nervous, to be honest." "That's understandable. We don't know what we'll find. What if she doesn't want to see me? What if she rejects me again? Then at least you'll have answers, even if they're not what you hope for. And you won't be alone afterwards." Sophie closed her eyes, letting those comforting words sink in. "Thank you, Liam, for everything. See you tomorrow morning then. I'll pick you up at 8. "I'll be ready." After hanging up, Sophie went back to packing. At the bottom of the suitcase, she placed the photo of Amelia. It felt important to bring it, as though the sister she never knew could somehow give her strength for what lay ahead. Sitting on the edge of the bed, Sophie reflected on how her life had changed so dramatically in such a short time. From just a waitress with no clear past or future, she had become someone in search of her roots, her identity. Tomorrow, she would face Eleanor Mills. She would look into the eyes of the woman who brought her into the world and then abandoned her. She would ask why she was left behind while Amelia was raised by the family. She would demand to know why the secret was kept for so long. And maybe, just maybe, she would find the peace she had always sought. With that thought, Sophie finished preparing for the trip that could change everything she knew about herself, a journey to her roots, her past, and potentially her future. The morning sun shone through the window of the small hotel room where Sophie had spent the night. Sitting on the edge of the bed, she looked at the address on a crumpled piece of paper. After days of searching, they had finally confirmed that Eleanor Mills still lived in Willowdale, in the same modest red brick house where Amelia had grown up. The road to get there had not been easy. After their initial trip, when they found out that the old address was still valid but no one answered the door, Sophie spent weeks summoning the courage to return. Each day brought fresh doubts, new fears, and more reasons to delay a confrontation that could change everything. What if she rejects me again? Sophie had asked herself countless times during sleepless nights. Her relationship with Liam and Riley had deepened over those weeks. What began as a connection based on her resemblance to Amelia had become something else, a friendship born of extraordinary circumstances. Liam had become her support, her confidant, the person who encouraged her when fear threatened to paralyze her. And then there was Riley. The little girl who initially mistook her for her mum now called her Aunt Sophie and eagerly awaited her visits. Surprisingly, the child had become an unexpected source of courage. "Does Grandma know you exist?" Riley had asked innocently during a picnic in the park. "I don't know, honey," Sophie had answered, feeling her heart tighten. "That's what I'm going to find out. If she doesn't know, you can tell her. I tell Daddy stories when he doesn't know something." The simplicity of a child's logic had made Sophie smile. If only it were as easy as telling a story. Now, gazing out the window at the small town coming to life, Sophie made her decision. She wouldn't call first, wouldn't schedule a meeting. She would go to Eleanor Mills's house and knock on the door. The element of surprise might be harsh, but it would be honest. After all, her own existence had been a surprise to her until a few weeks ago. After a breakfast she could barely touch. Sophie walked through Willowdale's quiet streets. The town looked like it belonged on a postcard. Old houses, well-kept gardens, people greeting each other by name. A place where secrets should be hard to keep. Yet a secret the size of a lifetime had thrived there. The house stood at the end of a tree-lined street, modest but well cared for, with a small front garden where yellow roses timidly bloomed. Sophie stopped on the sidewalk, her heart pounding so hard it felt like it might burst from her chest. For a moment, she considered turning around, going back to the hotel, back to her life in another place, leaving the past buried where it had always been. But then she remembered Amelia's face in the photograph, Riley's smile, Liam's quiet but firm support. She had come too far to give up now. With determined steps, she crossed the small garden and climbed the 3 steps to the front door. She took a deep breath and rang the doorbell. The seconds that followed felt like an eternity. Sophie could hear footsteps approaching on the other side, light and hesitant. Then the handle turned, the door opened, and she stood face to face with a woman around 60, grey hair pinned in a simple bun, tired eyes, yet still with a familiar honey hue. Amelia's eyes, her eyes. The reaction was immediate. The woman froze, all color drained from her face, one hand rising to cover her mouth. Her eyes widened, fixed on Sophie as though seeing a ghost. "Amelia," she whispered, almost inaudibly. Sophie swallowed hard, trying to hold herself together. "No," she replied gently. "My name is Sophie. Sophie Lawson." Eleanor Mills staggered backward, leaning against the doorframe. For a moment, Sophie feared she might faint. "This can't be," the woman murmured, still staring at Sophie with wide eyes. "You can't be—" "I think I'm your daughter," Sophie said, the words coming out with difficulty. "The daughter you gave up for adoption." A heavy silence fell between them, broken only by the distant sound of a lawnmower somewhere nearby. Eleanor continued to stare at Sophie, as though confronted by an impossible apparition. "Please," Sophie went on, her voice now barely above a whisper, "I need to understand. I need to know why." Slowly, as if moving in a dream, Eleanor opened the door wider. "Come in," she said, her voice trembling. "Please, come in." The house was as modest inside as it was out. Old but well-kept furniture, framed photos on the walls, and the smell of freshly brewed coffee in the air. A simple home filled with a lifetime of memories. Eleanor led Sophie to the living room, indicating a worn floral sofa. I'll get some water," she said, clearly trying to buy time to collect herself. While she waited, Sophie looked around the room. On the walls were many photos of Amelia at different ages. Amelia as a child, missing her front teeth. Amelia as a teenager, holding a school trophy. Amelia as an adult, standing next to Liam on their wedding day. In none of them was there any sign of a father or of another child. No indication that Amelia had a twin sister. Eleanor returned with 2 glasses of water, her hands still shaking. She sat in an armchair opposite Sophie, placing the glasses on the coffee table. For a moment, they just looked at each other. 2 women bound by blood, yet separated by decisions made long ago. "How did you find me?" Eleanor finally asked. "Through Liam, Amelia's husband," Sophie replied. "My sister." Eleanor winced at the words. "So you know." "I know I had a twin sister. I know she died. I know she never knew I existed, just as I never knew about her until a few weeks ago." Sophie paused, trying to steady her voice. "What I don't know is why. Why abandon me? Why hide the truth from Amelia? Why never try to find me?" Eleanor lowered her gaze, focusing on the untouched glass of water before her. When she finally spoke, her voice carried the weight of decades of guarded secrets. "You have to understand, times were hard." "I'm trying to understand," Sophie said, keeping her voice firm despite the tears threatening to fall. "That's why I'm here." Eleanor took a deep breath, like someone preparing to lift a huge burden. "Your father died when I was 7 months pregnant. An accident at the factory where he worked. I had no family, no money, nowhere to go." She paused, eyes drifting into painful memories. "When you 2 were born, I could barely feed 1 mouth, let alone 2. The doctor said you were both very small, in need of special care. I couldn't provide that." Sophie let a tear roll down her face. It was a heartbreaking story, but still didn't explain everything. "So you decided to keep one and give the other away?" Eleanor flinched as though slapped. "It wasn't like that," she said, voice trembling. "I loved you both more than you can imagine, but I saw no way out." "So what was the solution? Separating 2 sisters forever?" "There was a couple," Eleanor continued, ignoring the question. "They couldn't have children. The doctor knew them, said they were good people, financially stable enough to raise a child. He He said it was better for one of you to have a decent life than for both of you to suffer. And you agreed, Sophie concluded, letting her hurt show. It was the hardest decision of my life, Eleanor said, tears now streaming down her lined cheeks. I thought I was doing what was best for you, giving you a chance I couldn't offer. Why never tell Amelia? Why keep it a secret all these years? Eleanor stood up, went to a shelf and returned with a wooden box. She opened it carefully, removing a time-worn envelope. They gave me this letter, the day they took you. They promised they would give it to you when you turned 18, explaining everything, telling you that you had a sister, that I didn't abandon you out of lack of love. So what happened? They died, Eleanor said, her voice breaking. A car accident when you were only 5. I learned about it from the newspapers. I tried to find you, but you'd been placed in a state orphanage. The adoption laws at the time, I had no legal rights. I couldn't just show up and claim you. So you gave up, Sophie stated, her tone more accusatory than she intended. No, Eleanor exclaimed with surprising force. I never gave up. I spent years trying to find a legal way to reach you. I saved every cent to hire lawyers, but every door closed in my face. The laws protected anonymity, protected the system. I was just a poor, lonely woman with no resources, no power. Sophie absorbed those words, trying to picture a younger Eleanor, fighting a system designed to keep them apart. What about Amelia? Why never tell her? Eleanor sighed deeply. At first, she was too young to understand. Then I feared the truth would hurt her, that she'd feel guilty for staying with me while you were given away. Time passed, the secret grew, and it became too big to reveal. She paused, her hands shaking as she refolded the envelope. When Amelia grew up and started asking about her father, her family, I made up stories that wouldn't hurt her. I said it was just the two of us against the world, a half-truth that became our reality. Silence settled over them again, each lost in their own thoughts. Outside, life carried on. Birds sang, children played in some distant yard. Cars occasionally passed on the quiet street. Inside the little living room, two lives separated by decades tried to find meaning in the chaos of the past. Do you have photos? Eleanor finally asked, her voice barely above a whisper. Of you as you grew up? Sophie hesitated, then opened her bag and pulled out a few pictures she had brought, photos of different stages. Sophie as a child in the orphanage, as a teenager at a school party, and as an adult at her first job. Eleanor examined them with reverent care, touching each image as if it were a precious treasure. You had the same eyes, she murmured. The same smile, just like Amelia. We were identical, Sophie confirmed. When Liam and his daughter first saw me, they thought I was her. Eleanor looked up from the photos, pain etched on her face. Not a day passed that I didn't think of you, she said. Every year on Amelia's birthday, I lit 2 candles on the cake, one for her, here with me. Another for you, wherever you were. I prayed that you were well, that you were happy. It wasn't easy, Sophie admitted, growing up in an orphanage, watching others get adopted while you remain, wondering why nobody wanted you. I wanted you, Eleanor said, her voice choked with emotion. I always wanted you. I just couldn't keep you. Hours passed as they shared stories. Eleanor about Amelia's childhood, Sophie about her life in the orphanage, and then as an independent adult. There were so many years to recover, so many gaps to fill. Sophie's initial hurt and anger slowly gave way to a reluctant understanding. Not forgiveness, not yet, but at least the start of clarity. When the sun began to set, Sophie realized she needed to go. There was a hotel room waiting, and a lifetime of revelations to process. Can I see you again? Eleanor asked hesitantly at the door, her posture bent as though carrying an invisible weight. Sophie hesitated. It was too soon for promises, for guarantees of a future relationship. The wound of abandonment, even with all the explanations, was still open and tender. I need time, she replied honestly. To think, to take it all in. Eleanor nodded, understanding despite the obvious pain in her eyes. Of course. I'll be here whenever you're ready. Sophie turned to leave, then stopped and faced the woman who was her biological mother. Why Sophie? She asked. Why did you give me that name? A sad smile crossed Eleanor's face. It was my grandmother's name, the only person who truly cared for me when I was a child. I hoped maybe the name would protect you. Amelia was named for your father's mother. I thought it would be fair to give each of you a name from a different family line, so you'd have some connection to your roots, even if you didn't know it. Sophie nodded, absorbing this small detail that somehow felt significant. Thank you for telling me, she said simply, then turned and walked back through the garden to the street. Back at the hotel, lying on the narrow bed, Sophie stayed up late, replaying every moment of the encounter, every word exchanged, every revelation. Eleanor's story was tragic, filled with mitigating circumstances and real barriers. Part of Sophie wanted to believe it all, to accept the explanations, start a relationship with the mother she never knew. Another part remained cautious, wounded, wondering if she would have made different choices in Eleanor's place, fought harder, searched more, persisted beyond the obstacles. In the days that followed, Sophie remained in Willowdale, wandering the same streets Amelia had once walked as she grew up. She visited the school her sister attended, the park where she had played, places that belonged to a life that might have been shared. She didn't return to Eleanor's house, although she knew the woman anxiously awaited another contact. She needed time for herself, time to organize her thoughts, decide what kind of relationship, if any, she wanted to build with the mother who gave her life and then let her go. Nights were long, filled with reflections on the past and decisions about the future. There was so much to consider, so many intertwined lives now bound by this newly revealed truth. Liam and Riley waited for her back home, eager for news. Eleanor waited in her modest home, hoping for a second chance, and in the middle of it all was Sophie, trying to find her place in this new reality, a place no longer defined only by absence and the unknown, but by new connections that despite all the pain, finally completed the puzzle of her identity. As she watched the sun set over the town that was part of her untold history, Sophie knew she would need more time to process everything she had discovered, time to think, to feel, to decide how to move forward. Whatever path she chose, at least now she knew the truth she had been seeking all her life. The return trip felt longer than the journey there. The bus rumbled across rural roads as Sophie gazed out the window, her mind still processing everything that had happened in the past few days. Meeting Eleanor had unearthed feelings she hadn't known existed: anger, sadness, reluctant understanding, and, surprisingly, a strange relief at finally knowing the truth. 3 days in Willowdale had been enough. 3 days of walking the streets that could have been hers, visiting the places Amelia had known, absorbing the story of a family torn apart by impossible circumstances. Now it was time to go back and decide what to do with all these new truths. When the bus arrived at the station, Sophie picked up her small suitcase and walked to the taxi stand. A light rain was starting to fall, matching her contemplative mood. She gave the driver not the address of her apartment, but Liam's. She had done a lot of thinking during the trip, and she needed to talk to him first. Liam's house was modest, with a small front yard where Riley's toys lay scattered, protected from the rain by the porch. Sophie hesitated before climbing the steps. She had sent only a short message when she left for Willowdale: "I need to do this alone." Liam had replied with a simple, "I understand. We'll be here when you return." No contact since then. Taking a deep breath, she rang the doorbell. The door opened, and there was Liam, his face showing surprise that quickly turned to relief. "Sophie," he said, his tone revealing genuine happiness to see her. "You're back." "I'm back," she replied, feeling a rush of emotion she hadn't expected. "Can we talk?" "Of course." Liam stepped aside, opening the door wider. "Riley's at my mum's place. Come on in." Sophie nodded, following him inside. The house was cozy, with family photos on the walls. Many showed Amelia smiling, living a life Sophie never knew. It felt strange to see her own face in pictures she hadn't been part of, with people she had never met. In the living room, they sat down, an uncomfortable silence hanging between them. "How did it go?" Liam finally asked. Sophie looked at her hands, searching for words to describe the experience. "Intense," she finally replied. She recognized me immediately, like she was seeing a ghost. I can imagine. She told me everything. Why she left me, why she never told Amelia, why she could never find me afterward. Sophie paused, emotion catching in her throat. I'm not sure I can fully forgive her, but I understand more now. Liam nodded, giving her space to continue. She was on her own, pregnant with twins, with no money or support after my father died in an accident. She believed giving me up was giving me a better chance. Sophie swallowed hard. When the couple who adopted me died in a car crash, she tried to find me, but laws back then, she couldn't. I'm so sorry, Liam said softly. It's a sad story. Maybe under different circumstances, everything could have been different. She looked at a photo of Amelia on the shelf. We could have grown up together, been real sisters, not just in blood. A sympathetic silence fell between them. Sophie appreciated that Liam didn't try to fill it with empty words of comfort. Somehow, he understood that some pains couldn't be eased by platitudes. So now what? Liam asked finally. What are you going to do? Sophie took a deep breath, meeting his eyes directly. That's what I came to talk to you about. These past days made me think a lot about family, about connections, about what really matters. She paused, gathering courage. I missed out on knowing my sister. I'll never get that back. But there's still a part of her here in you, in Riley. Liam watched her closely, curiosity and apprehension mixed in his gaze. I want to be part of your lives, Liam, Sophie continued, her voice steadier now. Not to replace Amelia, I know that would be impossible and wrong. But to honor her memory, to get to know the family she loved, to be an aunt to Riley. Sophie. I know it's complicated, she interrupted, needing to finish what she had mentally rehearsed so many times on the bus ride home. I know my presence might bring painful memories. For Riley, it might be confusing to see someone who looks so much like her mom. But I also think we can build something good out of all this. New bonds, a new kind of family, respecting who we are and what we've been through. Liam stayed silent for a moment, absorbing her words. It wouldn't be about replacing Amelia, Sophie emphasized. It would be about creating something new, something that honors what she meant to all of us. I know, Liam finally replied, his voice gentle. And I think she would want that. An invisible weight seemed to lift from Sophie's shoulders. So you don't oppose it? No, Liam said with a small smile. Riley's already been asking when Aunt Sophie would be back. I think in her own way, she already sees you as part of our family. Tears filled Sophie's eyes, but this time they weren't tears of sadness or anger. They were tears of relief, hope, possibility. Thank you, she said simply. No need to thank me. Maybe this is what Amelia wanted in a way. Maybe that's why our paths crossed at that diner. Sophie nodded, letting herself believe that possibility. Even after leaving, Amelia had found a way to bring together the people she loved, to complete a circle broken long ago. Would you like to stay for dinner? Liam asked, breaking the solemn moment. I'll pick Riley up soon. She'll be happy to see you. I'd love to, Sophie replied, feeling for the first time in a long while, genuinely at home. While Liam went to the kitchen to start dinner, Sophie remained in the living room, looking at the photographs. At that face, so much like hers, yet with a completely different life. At the family Amelia had built and loved. I'll take care of them, she silently promised the sister she never knew. Not to take your place, but to honor your memory, to be the aunt Riley deserves, the friend Liam needs, to complete the circle that began when we were born. Somehow, Sophie knew it was the right thing to do, not just for Liam and Riley, but for herself. To heal the wounds of abandonment, to find a sense of belonging, to turn a story of loss into one of connection and new beginnings. Gazing out the window at the yard where Riley would soon be playing, Sophie felt a peace she hadn't known in a long time. She had found her way home, not the home she might have had, but the one she could build from now on. In the following weeks, life settled into a rhythm Sophie never could have predicted. What started as occasional visits to Liam and Riley turned into a natural, constant presence. Friday dinners together, Sunday outings to the park, everyday moments that once seemed trivial, now held the sweet weight of new memories being created. One sunny Saturday, Liam had to handle some work errands, and Sophie offered to stay with Riley. The day promised perfect weather for a picnic, so they packed a basket of sandwiches, fruit and juice, and headed to the town's public park, where a small lake was home to ducks and swans. "Can I feed the ducks, Aunt Sophie?" Riley asked, her eyes bright with excitement. "Of course, Bean, but just a little bit. Too many breadcrumbs aren't good for them," Sophie replied, pulling out a small bag she'd brought especially for that. Watching Riley feed the ducks, laughing at every clumsy movement the birds made, filled Sophie's heart with a joy she hadn't known was possible. There was something deeply healing in these simple moments, as though each of her niece's smiles helped mend part of her life she'd been denied. After Riley grew bored of feeding the ducks, they sat under an old oak tree to eat. The little girl chatted non-stop about school, her friends, a book her teacher was reading to the class. Sophie listened attentively, fascinated by this tiny human who, without knowing, had become a bridge between past and future. "Aunt Sophie," Riley said suddenly, her tone shifting to something more serious. "Did you meet my mommy in heaven?" The question caught Sophie off guard. She knew this moment would come, but she hadn't expected it so soon or so directly. "No, sweetheart," she answered carefully. "I never met your mom, not while she was alive." Riley frowned, processing the information. "But you look so much like her. Everybody says so." Sophie took a deep breath, choosing her words with care. "Remember when your dad told you your mum and I were sisters, twin sisters?" Riley nodded, curiosity filling her gaze. "That means we were both in the same mommy's tummy, born on the same day. That's why we look so much alike, but we grew up apart. I never met her while she was here." "That's sad," Riley commented, her young face showing an understanding beyond her years. "It is," Sophie agreed. "I really wish I had met her." A comfortable silence fell. Riley nibbled her sandwich thoughtfully. Sophie waited, sensing there was more to come. "I miss her a lot," Riley finally said, her voice small and fragile. "Sometimes I try really hard to remember her face, but it's getting harder." Sophie felt a knot in her throat. "That's why we have photos, sweetheart. They help us remember." "Yes, but..." Riley hesitated, her eyes now on her own feet. "Sometimes I look at you and it's like I'm seeing her. For a second, I forget she's gone. But then I remember it's not her. It's you." She looked up again. "It's weird. Not bad, just weird." Sophie's heart clenched at the child's raw honesty. She moved closer, gently pushing a strand of hair away from Riley's face. "I can imagine that must feel very strange," she said softly. "And it's okay to feel that. Daddy says it's good to talk about how we feel," Riley continued, "even when it's confusing. Your dad is right. And you can always tell me how you feel, even if it's confusing or hard." Riley fiddled with the hem of her shirt, apparently mustering courage for her next question. "Are you going to be my new mom now?" The question hung in the air between them, laden with hope, fear and vulnerability. Sophie took Riley's small hands in hers, meeting the girl's eyes directly. "No, Riley. I'm not going to be your mum," she said gently but firmly. "You already have a mum, and she'll always be your mum, even if she's not here anymore. No one can replace her, not even someone who looks so much like her." Riley nodded slowly, processing. "But that doesn't mean we can't have something special together," Sophie continued. "I'm your aunt. An aunt who didn't know you existed until recently, and who now can't imagine life without you. Like a friend. Yes, like a friend. A special friend who will always be there for you, who will listen to you, play with you, help you when you need it. We'll make our own story together, okay?" A small smile began to form on Riley's face. "Okay," she agreed. "I like having you as my aunt." "And I love being your aunt," Sophie replied, feeling a deep, genuine emotion in her own words. Riley, seeming satisfied with the talk, turned her attention back to their picnic and was soon off to chase the ducks again. Sophie watched her, amazed at how resilient children could be, how they could accept difficult truths and still move forward. When Liam arrived to pick them up a few hours later, he found the two building a sandcastle near the playground, laughing and chatting as if they had known each other all their lives. "Looks like you had a good day," he commented, smiling at the scene. The best, Riley replied, running to hug her dad. Aunt Sophie showed me how to make sand towers that don't collapse. That's a rare talent, Liam joked, exchanging a glance with Sophie over Riley's head. There was something different in that look, a newfound understanding, as if they had both crossed an invisible threshold. It wasn't just gratitude from him, nor just acceptance from her. It was deeper, a mutual acknowledgement that, against all odds, they were becoming a kind of family. On the way home, Riley fell asleep in the back seat, worn out from a day of play. Sophie and Liam spoke in low voices. "Did she ask you about Amelia?" Liam wanted to know. Sophie nodded. "She asked if I'd be her mom now." Liam gripped the steering wheel a little tighter, his knuckles turning white for a moment. "What did you say?" "I told her the truth, that nobody can replace her mom, but that I'm here as her aunt, her friend, to build a new story with her." Liam visibly relaxed. "Thank you," he said simply. "For what?" "For understanding. For respecting Amelia's place in our lives while creating your own." Sophie looked out the window, watching the houses blur by. "I've been thinking a lot about that lately," she confessed, "about not living in the shadow of the past, neither mine nor Amelia's." "And did you reach any conclusion?" "Yes. It's time to look forward. To build something new from what I have now, not from what could have been." Liam smiled, a genuine smile that lit up his face in a way Sophie rarely saw. "You know," he said, "that's exactly what Amelia would have said." In the days that followed, Sophie felt lighter, as though she'd left behind a weight she'd carried for so long she'd forgotten it was there. Her visits to Eleanor became regular, though still cautious. Her relationship with Riley grew stronger by the day. And then there was Liam. Liam, who had begun as a stranger connected to her only by her resemblance to his late wife, had become a true friend. Someone who understood her in a way few did, who respected her journey, who encouraged her to move forward. One cool autumn evening, while Riley slept and they shared coffee on the porch, Sophie revealed a decision she'd been considering. "I'm thinking of going back to school," she said. "I've always wanted to study art, but never had the chance." "That's great, Sophie," Liam replied with genuine enthusiasm. "You have an amazing talent." It was true. Over the past weeks, Sophie had rediscovered her passion for drawing, something she'd done in her teens but had set aside for the demands of life. She started by sketching Riley, capturing in soft lines the essence of her niece. Then she moved on to landscapes, everyday objects, and memories translated into images. "Do you really think I should try?" "I'm almost 30. So what? It's never too late to follow a dream," Liam smiled. "Besides, Riley would be so proud to have an artist aunt." Sophie felt warmth spread through her chest. That was what she appreciated most in Liam. His ability to believe in her, to see possibilities where she saw only obstacles. "Thank you," she said simply. "For what?" "For helping me find my place, for making me feel like I belong somewhere." Liam looked at her for a long moment, his eyes reflecting the soft light from the living room. "You do belong, Sophie. Never doubt that." That night, lying in bed, Sophie thought about how life could change so drastically in such a short period. A few months ago, she had been just a lonely waitress with a murky past and an uncertain future. Now she had a family, not the traditional one she once dreamed of, but perhaps more precious because it had been found against all odds. She had a niece she loved as if she were her own, a mother she was slowly rebuilding a relationship with, despite past scars. And Liam, who was a friend, a pillar of support, someone who saw her not as a replacement for Amelia, but as Sophie, unique and whole. As sleep crept in, Sophie thought of her conversation with Riley about creating a new story together. That was exactly what she was doing now. Not erasing the past, but letting it become just one chapter in a much larger story. A story she finally felt she had the power to write. The next day, she awoke early and, suddenly inspired, opened her sketchbook. With firm yet gentle strokes, she began drawing a portrait, not of Riley, nor of Liam, nor even of Amelia. She drew herself, as she saw herself now. Not a shadow or a reflection of someone else, but a complete woman with her own scars and her own beauty. When she finished, she looked at the drawing with quiet satisfaction. It was an honest self-portrait, with no embellishments or disguises. The eyes looking back at her from the page were no longer just eyes she shared with Amelia. They were hers, telling her own story. Sophie smiled. It was time to start a new chapter. Autumn gave way to winter, and with the changing of the season came a new routine. Sophie was no longer just an occasional guest at Liam and Riley's. She was a constant presence, a natural fit, as though she had always belonged in their family. There was no rush or pressure, just a genuine closeness that respected everyone's pace and space. Sundays became special. It was the day Sophie arrived early to help prepare an elaborate breakfast. Pancakes were always Riley's favorite. And then they spent the day together, sometimes going out, sometimes just enjoying each other's company at home. On one such Sunday, while Riley was drawing at the kitchen table, Sophie arrived carrying a cardboard box neatly tied with a simple ribbon. "What's that?" Liam asked curiously, helping her with her coat. "Something I've had set aside for weeks," Sophie replied, a mix of nervousness and excitement in her voice. "I think today is the right day to share it." Riley looked up from her artwork, immediately interested in the mystery box. "Is it a present?" she asked, already moving closer. "In a way," Sophie smiled, "it's more like pieces of our story." The three of them sat on the living room rug, the box between them. Carefully, Sophie untied the ribbon and lifted the lid. Inside was a photo album bound in simple brown leather. "I visited Eleanor last week," Sophie explained, taking the album out of the box. "She gave me some old photos, pictures of her when she was young, of my dad, our dad, whom I never knew. I thought maybe you'd like to see them too." Liam looked at her with surprise and gratitude. "Are you sure you want to share this with us?" "Absolutely," Sophie replied, opening the album to the first page. After all, it's part of Riley's story too. The first photograph showed a much younger Eleanor, maybe in her early 20s, sitting on a park bench. Her hair was dark and long, so different from the grey strands she had now. But the smile was the same, lighter, without decades of sadness and secrets. "This is your grandmother," Sophie said softly to Riley, who studied the image with curiosity. "A long time ago, before you were born, before your mommy was born." "She was pretty," Riley said, running her small fingers over the photo. "She was," Sophie agreed, turning the page. The next photo showed Eleanor with a tall, fair-haired man, both holding hands in front of a blooming tree. They looked young, clearly in love. "And this is your grandfather," Sophie explained, feeling a lump in her throat. She had never seen a photo of her own father until Eleanor gave her the album. "Thomas. He died before your mom and I were born." Liam watched Sophie closely, sensing how meaningful that moment was for her, seeing for the first time the face of the father she never knew, sharing that discovery with her new family. As they turned the pages, the story unfolded in images. Eleanor pregnant, cradling the rounded belly where two lives grew, unaware they would be separated. The small house they lived in, modest but welcoming. A dog, Eleanor mentioned, had been Thomas's faithful companion. "Look, Daddy, Mommy as a baby," Riley exclaimed, pointing to a photo of Amelia as a toddler, maybe 4, holding a toy. It was the first time they'd seen how Amelia looked before Liam knew her. "Yes, Princess," Liam answered, voice thick with emotion. "That's your mom when she was about your age." Riley looked from the photo to Sophie, her face showing the wonder of a child discovering invisible threads that connect people. "And where were you?" she asked Sophie. Sophie exchanged a glance with Liam, thinking how best to explain. They had agreed to be honest with Riley in a way she could understand. "I was somewhere else," she finally replied. "Remember I told you I grew up without knowing I had a sister, that I only found out about her when I met you?" Riley nodded, taking in the explanation with the direct acceptance only children seem to have. They continued flipping through the album, each photo revealing a new fragment of the past. Sophie and Liam filled in the spaces between pictures with stories Eleanor had shared. How Thomas used to play guitar on summer evenings, how Amelia, even as a little girl, had a natural gift for making friends. Tiny details that formed the mosaic of a family history that now belonged to all of them. One photo, in particular, caught Riley's attention. Eleanor sat in front of a birthday cake with 2 candles. She was smiling, but there was an unmistakable sadness in her eyes. "Why does she look sad if it's a party?" Riley asked, ever observant. Sophie took a deep breath, feeling Liam gently place a hand on her shoulder in support. "Eleanor told me that every year, on your mommy's birthday, she lit 2 candles on the cake, one for Amelia, who was with her, and one for me, wherever I was. It was her way of remembering she had 2 daughters, even though we couldn't be together." Riley was silent for a moment, absorbing that information. "That's sad, but also kind of beautiful," she concluded, surprising both Sophie and Liam with her wisdom. When they reached the last pages of the album, they saw more recent photos. Eleanor had included some pictures of her reunion with Sophie, taken on her phone during a recent visit. There was also one of Riley that Sophie had shared with her grandmother. "Look, that's me," Riley exclaimed, pointing at her own picture. "It is," Sophie smiled. "Eleanor really wanted to know what you looked like. I showed her this picture and she was so happy. She said you have your grandfather's smile." "Can I meet her one day?" Riley asked, looking hopefully from Sophie to Liam. The 2 adults exchanged glances. It was a significant step, one that further entwined the 3 generations in this newly discovered story. "If your dad agrees, I think Eleanor would love to meet you," Sophie said. "We can think about it." Liam nodded, smiling at his daughter. "Maybe during the next school break." Riley's face lit up at the prospect. On the last page of the album, there was space for new photos. Eleanor had deliberately left several blank pages with a small handwritten note. "For the new memories you will make together." "I think we need a photo of us here," Sophie suggested, picking up her phone. "All 3 of us to start filling these pages." They gathered on the couch, Riley in the middle, Liam and Sophie on either side. Sophie set the timer, and the flash went off, capturing the moment. 3 genuine smiles, 3 lives once separated and now united by unexpected twists of fate. Later, while Riley slept and they cleaned the kitchen after dinner, Liam turned to Sophie, looking serious. "Thank you for what you did today," he said, handing her a wet plate to dry. "Sharing those photos, that story, it means a lot." "It's our story now," Sophie answered simply. "All of us." And it was true. What began as a solitary search for identity had become something much bigger. An unconventional family, forged through losses and discoveries, united not just by blood, but by the daily choice to love and respect each other's space. The photo album rested on the living room table, waiting for new memories. Sophie felt a certainty grow in her heart. The past, with all its pain and absences, had finally found its place. It was no longer a ghost that haunted her, but simply the beginning of a story still being written, page by page, photo by photo, day by day. A story of a family that, against all odds, had found its way back to each other. Rain fell steadily as Liam watched the people passing by in the coffee shop. Customers came and went, some alone, some with companions, each caught up in the normal flow of life. Life that, for him, had stopped when Amelia died, and now, unexpectedly, was taking on new shape with Sophie's presence. That was exactly the issue that had tormented him for the past few weeks. Ever since Sophie became part of their daily life, things changed. Riley was happier, chattier, seemed lighter. The house, once a place of painful memories, was becoming a home again. And he was confused. "Sorry, I'm late," said Mark, peeling off his wet jacket and sitting down. "The traffic's awful in this weather." Mark had been his friend since college, one of the few who stuck around after Amelia's death, who didn't vanish when grief became too heavy for casual chats about sports or politics. "No problem," Liam smiled, genuinely glad to see his friend. "Thanks for coming. From the tone of your message, it seemed important." Liam nodded, absently stirring his now cold coffee. "It's about Sophie," he finally said. Mark raised his eyebrows. He knew the whole story from the beginning, from the first diner encounter to the reunion with Eleanor. "Something wrong?" "No, not exactly wrong." Liam hesitated, choosing his words. "It's just weird. Sometimes I look at her and see Amelia, same smile, the way she tilts her head when she's thinking. And then I catch myself wanting to be near her, wanting to see her every day, and I'm not sure if it's because she reminds me of Amelia or because of who she is." Mark ordered a coffee from a passing waiter, then turned back to Liam. "You're feeling attracted to her," he concluded, not as a question but as a statement of fact. Liam lowered his eyes, feeling guilty. "Isn't that wrong? She's Amelia's sister. It's like I'm betraying Amelia," Mark finished, as direct as ever. "Liam, Amelia's been gone nearly 2 years. You're not betraying anyone. But looking at Sophie and feeling something that doesn't feel right." Mark's coffee arrived, and he sipped it thoughtfully before replying. "You need to separate Amelia from Sophie," he finally said, with the frankness only real friends can offer. "They're not the same person. You still love Amelia, but Sophie can't replace her. You're clinging to the past. Sophie is in your life now in a different way. If you want to move forward, you need to let the past rest and appreciate the present for what it is." The words hit Liam like a physical blow. He knew there was truth in them, but hearing someone say it out loud made it more real, more urgent. "It's not that simple," he argued, more to himself than to Mark. "It never is," his friend agreed. "But you have to start somewhere. The first step is recognizing what's really going on." "And what is really going on?" Liam asked, almost afraid of the answer. Mark gave a sympathetic smile. "You're alive, Liam. After spending so long just existing, you're finally living again, and it scares you." Liam let the words sink in. They were true. Since Amelia's death, he had been a shadow, living only for Riley, not really engaging in life. Sophie brought color back, laughter, possibilities, and it terrified him. "I'm afraid," he admitted quietly. "Afraid of getting attached and losing again? Afraid of betraying what I felt for Amelia? Afraid of confusing things and making Sophie feel she's just a stand-in?" "Those are valid fears," Mark acknowledged. "But have you considered how Sophie feels? She's navigating unknown waters too. She discovered a sister she never met, who's gone. She's building a relationship with a niece she never knew existed. And with you, she deserves to be seen for who she is, not just who she resembles." The rain intensified, pounding harder against the coffee shop windows. They sat in silence for a while, each lost in thought. "I'm not saying forget Amelia," Mark continued eventually. "She'll always be part of you, of Riley, of your memories, but there's a difference between honoring the past and living chained to it. How do I find that balance? Start by seeing Sophie for who she really is, a woman with her own story, her own dreams, her own identity. Someone who just happens to share a face with the woman you loved, but who's unique in every other way." Liam thought of Sophie, not the ways she looked like Amelia, but the differences he'd noticed more and more. She was more reserved in some areas, more open in others. She loved art, something Amelia appreciated but never practiced. She looked at the world with a mix of caution and hope, shaped by a lonely childhood Amelia never experienced. "I guess I never really looked at her," he realized out loud. "Not truly. Then maybe it's time to start," Mark suggested gently. When they said goodbye, the rain had slowed to a light drizzle. Liam walked slowly to his car, Mark's words echoing in his mind. "You need to separate Amelia from Sophie. They're not the same person." He drove home carefully, the wet streets reflecting the city lights. An old song played softly on the radio, one Amelia had loved. Before, that would have been enough to plunge him into painful memories. Today he managed to appreciate the melody for what it was, sensing Amelia's presence not as a haunting ghost, but as a comforting light guiding him. At home, he found Riley already asleep, and Sophie cleaning up the kitchen after dinner. "Sorry I couldn't get here earlier," he said, hanging his damp coat. "How was she?" "Great," Sophie smiled. "We read that new book she got. Then she insisted on drawing all the characters. She's talented, you know. Maybe we have a budding artist in the family." Family. The word hung between them, no longer scary but reassuring in its simplicity and truth. They were a family now, not in the traditional sense, but in every way that mattered. Liam looked at Sophie with new eyes, noticing the little things that made her unique. The way she tied her hair when she was focused, how she spoke with her hands when excited, how her smile, though identical to Amelia's in shape, carried a completely different history. "Thank you for looking after her," he said, genuinely meaning every word. "For taking care of us." Sophie turned toward him, surprise in her expression at the intensity in his voice. "We're a family," she replied simply. "We look out for each other." In that moment, Liam knew Mark was right. It was time to honor the past without living in it. Time to appreciate the present for what it was, not for what it reminded him of. Time to look at Sophie and see not Amelia's ghost, but a remarkable woman who, by chance, had entered his life in the most unexpected way. A woman who deserved her own space in his heart, not as a replacement, but as someone unique and precious in her own right. "Yes," he agreed, feeling an invisible weight lift from his shoulders. "We are a family." And for the first time in a long while, the future didn't feel like something merely to be endured. It felt like something to look forward to, with curiosity and maybe even hope. The cemetery was quiet that Sunday morning. Sophie walked slowly among the headstones, holding a small bouquet of white daisies she'd picked from the community garden near her apartment. They weren't fancy or expensive flowers, just simple daisies, honest blooms for an honest moment. Liam had explained where to find the grave and even sketched a little map, but insisted that it was something she needed to do on her own. "It's something you have to do by yourself," he had said the night before, when she finally mustered the courage to ask for directions. "I'll be waiting when you're done." Sophie appreciated the gesture. She did need this moment alone with the sister she never knew. Deciding to visit Amelia's grave felt like a natural next step in her journey of self-discovery. Following Liam's hand-drawn map, she found the spot easily. A simple grey granite headstone with Amelia's name etched in elegant lettering, followed by the dates that marked a life cut short, and the inscription, "Beloved wife, mother, and daughter. Your smile will live on in our hearts forever." Sophie felt a lump in her throat. It was strange to stand there, facing the concrete proof of someone's absence, someone who had never been physically present in her life, but had always been part of it, somehow. She knelt on the damp grass, placing the daisies by the headstone. For a long moment, she remained silent, feeling the weight of this overdue encounter. The tears came naturally, without sobs or drama, just quietly streaming down her face, carrying a whirlwind of emotions. "Hi, Amelia," she finally said softly. "It's me, Sophie, your sister." A leaf drifted down, landing next to the daisies. Sophie picked it up, twirling it between her fingers as she searched for the right words. "I'm sorry we never got to meet," she went on. "I'm sorry for all the conversations we never had, the birthdays we never shared, the stories we didn't exchange." The cemetery's silence felt comforting, as though the whole world had paused to give her this moment. "I've met your daughter," Sophie smiled through her tears. "Riley is wonderful. She has your eyes, our eyes, and your smile, according to Liam. She's smart, curious, so full of life. You did such an amazing job with her, even in the short time you had." Sophie took a deep breath, organizing her thoughts. There was so much she wanted to say, but words felt too small. "I've met our mother too," she said after a pause. "Eleanor. She's carried a lot of pain, losing me, then losing you. We're trying to build something together now to make peace with the past. It's not easy, but we're trying." The sun was rising higher in the sky, bathing the cemetery in a golden light, turning a place of sorrow into something almost serene. "I want you to know that I'm not trying to take your place," Sophie continued. "In Riley's life, in Liam's, in Eleanor's, I know your space is yours, unique and special. I'm just trying to find my own place in this family that, somehow, also became mine." The tears had stopped, and Sophie realized that what she felt now wasn't just sorrow, but a mix of gratitude, respect, and a strange sense of connection. "I promise I'll take care of them," she said with conviction. "Riley, Liam, Eleanor. Not the way you would, Waitress, because each of us has our own ways, but with all the love and dedication I can offer. I promise to keep your memory alive, to tell Riley about the wonderful mum she had, about how loved and cherished she was." Sophie adjusted herself, sitting cross-legged on the grass. She wasn't in a hurry. This moment was too precious to rush. "It's funny how life works sometimes," she reflected, gazing at the now bright blue sky. I grew up feeling incomplete, like part of me was missing. I never knew it was you, and now that I do, you're no longer here. She sighed. But in some way, finding your family, our family, helped me find myself too, to understand who I am, where I come from, to fill that empty space I always felt. Before leaving, she gently touched the cold headstone, a gesture of both goodbye and a new beginning. "See you later, sister," she whispered. "Rest in peace." The path back felt lighter, as if a burden had been lifted. She found Liam waiting in the car, parked under the shade of a large tree at the cemetery entrance. He didn't ask anything when she got in, only offered a gentle, understanding smile. They drove in silence for a few minutes, each lost in thought. Sophie was the first to speak. "Thank you for letting me do that alone," she said. "It was important to me." "I figured it would be," Liam replied, keeping his eyes on the road. "It was important for me too the first time I visited after the funeral, having that private moment, a real goodbye, not just a formal one." Sophie nodded, fully understanding what he meant. It wasn't exactly a goodbye, she reflected, more like a late meeting, a way to establish some kind of connection, even if just symbolic. "How do you feel?" "At peace," Sophie answered after a thoughtful pause. "Sad for all we lost, for what could have been, but also grateful for what I've found through her, for you, for Riley, for Eleanor. For this family I never imagined I'd have." When they reached Liam's house, instead of going inside immediately, they walked over to a small bench in the front yard. It was a beautiful day, too nice to be indoors, and they both sensed the conversation they were about to have deserved open skies, sunshine and birdsong. "I've been thinking a lot about what Mark told me," Liam began, once they were seated side by side, "about separating you from Amelia, about appreciating the present for what it is." "And did you reach any conclusion?" "Yes," he replied, looking directly at her. "I realized I was being unfair to you. Sometimes I looked at you and only saw her reflection, not the unique and extraordinary person you are." Sophie felt her heart accelerate at his words, but kept her face calm. "It's natural, given the circumstances," she said softly. "I'm not offended by it." "But you should have been," Liam insisted gently, "because you deserve to be seen for who you are, not for who you look like." "Amelia will always have a special place in my heart," Liam continued after a short pause. "She was my first love, Riley's mother, a fundamental part of my story. But I've realized that doesn't mean I have to live stuck in the past." "It's a fine line," Sophie commented, "between honoring someone's memory and letting that memory stop you from moving on." "Exactly," Liam agreed, "and I think I'm finally learning how to walk that line, to keep Amelia alive in our memories, our stories, in the love we have for Riley, without letting the pain of losing her define who we are now. I want you to know," he went on, his voice softer now, "that the space you've carved out in our lives is yours, real and unique. It's not a replacement for what we lost, but something new and precious on its own." Sophie felt tears fill her eyes, touched by the sincerity of his words. "Thank you for that," she said simply. "It means a lot to me." "Riley adores you," Liam smiled. "Not as a replacement for her mom, but as the special aunt you've become. And he hesitated slightly. "I really value having you in our lives." "I promise I'll always be there for her," Sophie said earnestly. "I'll stand by her for every important moment, every milestone, not to replace Amelia, but to honor the bond we share." From inside the house, they heard Riley's excited voice calling them. It was lunchtime, time to return to the present, to life moving forward. Before they stood, Liam took Sophie's hand briefly. "Thank you for visiting Amelia today," he said, "for creating that connection, for honoring her memory in that way." "It was the least I could do," Sophie replied. "She gave me so much without even knowing it. She gave me a family." They walked into the house together, where Riley proudly showed them a special drawing she'd made. On the paper, 3 stick figures smiled under a bright yellow sun. "That's our family," the little girl explained. "Me, Daddy, and Aunt Sophie." Sophie felt her heart warm. It was that simple in a child's mind. The complexities, the pain, the improbable circumstances that had brought them together, none of that mattered to Riley. All that mattered was love, presence, the here and now. As they sat down at the table for lunch, Sophie realized that, despite all the loss, she had gained something precious, a new chance, a fresh start, a family built not just by blood, but by choice. Amelia would always be there in some way. Riley's laughter, Liam's stories, the photos on the walls. But that presence was no longer a painful ghost. It was a soft light guiding them forward. And Sophie knew, with a certainty that came from deep within, that she was exactly where she needed to be. Not as a substitute, not as a shadow, but as herself, whole and unique in her own story. A story that, after so many twists and turns, finally made sense. Spring arrived in a burst of color and fragrance. After a harsh winter, the sun shone brighter, warming the ground and awakening sleeping flowers, as though nature was celebrating fresh beginnings, just as Sophie, Liam and Riley were celebrating theirs. That Saturday afternoon, the sky was a brilliant, cloudless blue, the perfect day for the plan they had been discussing for weeks. "So are you sure this is the right spot?" Liam asked, carrying a shovel and eyeing the small patch Sophie had chosen in the yard. "Absolutely," she replied, smiling. "From here we can see it from the kitchen window, and there's enough space for it to grow without getting in the way." Riley ran excitedly across the lawn, carrying a watering can nearly as big as she was, spilling water as she went. "Careful not to use all the water before we get to the tree," Liam called out, laughing at his daughter's enthusiasm. "I won't, Daddy," Riley replied, slowing her pace but not her excitement. "I'm just watering the flowers along the way." Sophie watched with a full heart. Her life had changed so much in the past months. Once a lonely waitress with a mysterious past, she was now part of a family. An unusual family, shaped by extraordinary coincidences and difficult choices, but a true family all the same. The cherry sapling they'd picked out rested in a pot, waiting for its new home. It wasn't just any tree. It was a symbol of renewal, of growth, of beauty that emerges after the harshest winters. "All set?" Liam asked, starting to dig the hole where the tree would be planted. "Almost," Sophie said, pulling a small metal box from her bag. "I had an idea. I thought we could bury a few things with the tree, something special from each of us, like a ritual, I guess." Liam stopped digging, looking at her with curiosity. "What kind of things?" "Nothing valuable, just meaningful," Sophie explained. "Like this." She opened the box and showed him a small folded piece of paper. "It's the napkin from the diner, the day we first met. I've kept it all this time." Liam smiled, touched by the gesture. "That's a lovely idea," he agreed. "I think I have something too." He took out his wallet and pulled out a worn slip of paper. "Riley drew this picture for Amelia a week before the accident. Amelia kept it in her purse. It's the only thing that survived." Sophie gently squeezed Liam's arm, recognizing how precious that piece of paper was. "Are you sure? It's so personal." "It's perfect," he said, his voice a bit unsteady. "Amelia would love to be part of this moment, this new beginning." Riley, who had been listening with curiosity, dashed inside the house and returned minutes later with something in her small hands. "I have something to put in, too," she announced, showing them a little bracelet made of colorful beads. "Mommy helped me make it. It's too small for me now, but the tree can have it." Sophie felt tears well up in her eyes. The simplicity and depth of Riley's gesture touched her deeply. No elaborate words or explanations. The child understood perfectly what the moment meant. Together, they finished digging the hole large enough to fit the sapling's roots. At the bottom, they placed the metal box containing Sophie's diner napkin, Riley's drawing for Amelia, and the beaded bracelet. "Ready to plant our tree?" Liam asked Riley, who nodded eagerly. Carefully, they lifted the sapling from the pot, gently loosening the soil to free the roots. Sophie held it in the center of the hole, while Liam and Riley began to fill in the space with fresh dirt. "Each of us should put in a bit of soil by hand," Sophie suggested, "so the tree will have a little of each of us." Liam went first, taking a handful of soil and letting it slip slowly through his fingers, filling the empty spaces around the roots. His face was calm, at peace with the moment and all it signified. Riley was next, giggling as she plunged her small hands into the dirt, delighted by the texture. "Careful not to hurt the roots," Liam reminded her gently. "They're delicate." "I'm being careful, Daddy," she said, placing the earth with surprising delicacy for a child her age. Finally, it was Sophie's turn. With hands trembling from emotion, she took a handful of fresh soil and let it fall gently around the little tree they were now calling their own. "Thank you," she blurted suddenly, tears spilling freely now. "For what?" Liam asked, his gaze tender. "For welcoming me, for letting me be part of this family. It's more than I ever dreamed of having." Sensing the emotion of the moment, Riley hugged Sophie's legs. "You are our family, Aunt Sophie. You always were. We just didn't know it." Sophie knelt down, hugging Riley tightly, letting the tears flow. They weren't tears of sadness, but of gratitude, belonging, and hope. Liam joined the embrace, wrapping his arms around both of them. For a moment, they stayed like that, united under the afternoon sun, beside the young cherry tree that symbolized so much. "Now we have to water it really well," Riley reminded them, breaking the moment with the innocent practicality of a child. Laughing through tears, Sophie helped her lift the watering can. Together, they soaked the newly planted tree while Liam patted down the surrounding soil. When they finished, they stepped back to admire their work. The cherry tree was small, but its leaves gleamed in the sunlight, full of life and promise. One day, it would grow strong and tall, bloom in spring, and offer shade in summer. It would silently bear witness to the coming years, the laughter, the tears, the celebrations, and the everyday moments that make a family. "How about a picnic right here?" Liam suggested, "to celebrate our tree." "Yes," Riley exclaimed. "Can I bring my dolls?" "Of course you can, sweetheart," Sophie smiled. "I'll make some sandwiches while you get the blanket." As she walked to the kitchen, Sophie glanced back one more time. Liam and Riley stood chatting near the newly planted cherry tree, sunlight creating a golden halo around them. Her family, her home, her place in the world. The journey to this point had been long and full of twists and turns. It began with pain, with absences, with unanswered questions. But now, gazing at that simple, perfect scene, Sophie knew that every road, however winding, had led her exactly where she was meant to be. The little cherry tree, its roots now firmly planted in the same soil that held such precious memories, would stand witness to what they were building. A family founded on respect, love, and an acceptance of the past, but with eyes firmly on the future. A future as promising as the spring blooming all around them. If this story touched your heart, subscribe to the channel and turn on notifications so you don't miss the next ones. Leave a like because it helps this story get recommended to more people. See you in the next story.